Welcome to the Human Performance Podcast. Here we talk about everything to do with human performance and how leaders and organisations can get the best out of themselves and their people. I'm your host, Alex Young.
Hey Karin, welcome to the podcast. Great to be speaking with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's absolutely great speaking with you. I mean, I've literally just come back from New York. We were just talking about my background a little bit before we started recording. And I'm always fascinated about leadership and personal development and growth. And you have an amazing background, both working in Verizon as an executive, but then going into leadership coaching and developing people as leaders. But rather than me kind of butchering your introduction, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself to all the listeners and take them through your backstory and where you are now.
Okay, sure. So I run a company with my husband. It's called Let's Grow Leaders, and we work with leaders around the world to get human-centered. You'd be very human-centered with very practical tools and techniques. We've written a couple of books. The one we're going to talk about today is Courageous Cultures: How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. And we can talk more about that later. But I spent 10 years, before founding Let's Grow Leaders 8 years ago, I spent 10 years at Verizon as human resources, all things human resources. And then I moved in the next 10 years to a variety of field assignments. So I led a 2,200 person sales team, a 10,000 person customer service organization. And the reason I share that is everything that we teach, everything we write about is based on real life experience. Been there, done that, learned it the hard way, hoping to save some people some time and some angst, not make the mistakes that we did.
And for you sort of making that decision to leave your role in a large growing company, managing lots and lots of people, and then getting into leadership coaching and specifically the human aspect of that, where did that kind of decision come from for you personally?
It was interesting. My last role at Verizon, I led the transformation of what we called our strategic partnership channel. And what this was, before I took it over, it was called the vendor management organization. But what it was all of the business process outsourcers, all the call centers that were taking Verizon's calls that were not Verizon employees. So there were 7 different companies that we were working with, about 30 different contact centers that I was engaged with. And when I first took on that role, we had some real quality issues. The customer experience was not good. We had ramped up these outsourced call centers very quickly when Verizon first started selling the iPhone. You can't build contact centers that quickly and have, really good sustainable culture. So what I found myself doing was visiting these centers and helping ground them in how do you have great frontline supervisor leadership? How do you build great culture? How do you create employee engagement? In a circumstance where people aren't making a ton of money and they're spending a lot of time on the phone, you don't have a lot of extra time to do that. Really interesting leadership challenge. And what I found over the 3-year period that I was engaged with them is that we really were able to break it down and get really practical and do this well. And we absolutely transformed the customer experience in those companies. So as I was doing that, I started writing down, what are we doing? This is fascinating. What's working? And so I started a leadership blog. And originally it was I thought, who's going to read this is my team internally at Verizon who is supporting these different centers and the leadership and the frontline supervisors of the folks in these contact centers. But, I did it on an open platform, but I didn't expect anybody else to read it, just the people I was trying to communicate with. Well, the blog took off and get this international following, my son says, you got to go on Twitter. I'm like, all right, what's Twitter? Yeah. So I'm figuring this thing out. Well, I started getting asked to speak. When are you going to write your book? Can you come train our organization how to do this? And I'm like, no, I have this big day job. I can't do that. And then I thought, well, what if I could? That might really be neat. And so I experimented. I was invited to keynote this call center, international call center organization. And I just, volunteered to do it. got on stage. I get off the stage, and this guy says to me, his name was Shep Hyken. He says, "So when are you leaving Verizon?" And I'm like, did I say that from the stage? I was so nervous. My first keynote. He said, "No, you're supposed to do that. It's clear to me that this is what you're supposed to be doing next." And I thought about it. I went home. I'm like, all right, maybe I am. And so I did. I gave Verizon 4 months notice, quickly wrote a book, and started Let's Grow Leaders.
That is absolutely amazing. And I think with those big decisions that you have to make in life, obviously that's led you down a path where you are taking that expertise and really helping lots of people at scale, which is just fantastic. I mean, one thing that just jumps into my head immediately, when you even start going about that, so if you start writing your book or you go in with a new company and you look to optimize some of their leadership and look at their human and team dynamics and culture, where do you even start with that if you're going into something like a call center?
I think you first need to understand what's actually happening. And, really, when we work with a new client, what's working and how can you leverage the really good things that are happening? And where are your biggest opportunities to turn things around? And so I always start there, and to really, really listen and get in and have some discovery and understand what's happening. And, and then it's about breaking it down into very practical ways and things that people can do. One of the things that people say about our programs is like, this is just so practical. And at first I thought, I don't want to be the practical lady. But as it turns out, practical is what people need. And, they don't need a lot of leadership theory. I mean, all that stuff is nice. But what they need is, teach me some skills I can use today with my team that is going to create better results and improve our influence and relationships.
No, that's fantastic. And from, working with lots and lots of different organizations and from your time at Verizon and going through some of those experiences that you've had, what are some of the common things that you see, whether it's in call centers or whether it is in other industries, that are kind of generically applicable to organizations that perhaps don't have the best leadership programs or don't have the best developed culture?
Yeah, so we teach 6 universal concepts you can't lead without, and they work in healthcare, they work in call centers, they work at Amazon, they work at Nestle. I mean, they work everywhere, and it's this: show up with confidence and humility. Confidence to have a big vision, a big daring vision, confidence to stand up for what matters, speak the truth, the humility to surround yourself with people who will challenge you, to know your vulnerabilities, to admit when you're wrong, and focus on results and relationships. So, have a clear cadence of accountability, holding people accountable to those expectations, and then relationships, fostering collaboration up, down, and sideways, getting to know people as human beings. So those are the first 2. Show up with confidence and humility, focus on results and relationships. If you can get people just doing that in practical ways, it's transformative, because you can't possibly teach them a skill for everything. But if you can say, okay, I got to go have this conflict with this peer. How do I ground myself in confident humility, focusing on what we need to get done, but also improving the relationship? Or how do I run a meeting in that way? So those are first 2. Then communicating consistently. And we teach 5x5 communication. If something is important, you want to communicate it consistently 5 times, 5 different ways, so that it really sticks. Then a check for understanding, making sure that people are picking up what you're putting down. So if you've communicated something, have them speak that back to you so that you're sure you've got it. Super simple. People don't always do it. And so if you can teach that, we've heard from people at even the CEO level of businesses who are like, what's really helpful? That check for understanding. It's really transformed my leadership. Scheduling the finish, which is, are you getting specific dates and checking in with people when things are supposed to be handed back? Again, super simple. A lot of people don't do that. And then what we call mind the MIT, the most important thing. And this is, how do you keep your team focused at a strategic level on the most important things that are going to really make an impact on your business or organization, the short-term initiatives to accomplish those, and then the practical daily behaviors that people need to do to make sure that happens, and aligning teams around those. And so in any program we do, we ground people in those 6 things. And we find that if you can just nail those, you automatically see an improvement in performance.
No, that's awesome. And obviously, within those, you've rattled through those and put them into a nice kind of concise, practical package. But obviously, there's some complexities in how they're actually implemented for individuals within an organization. I mean, just thinking about soft skills in general, from things like the LinkedIn Learning and Development report, which says that lots of learning development managers host host soft skills as one of the most important learning development skills that they need to train their workforce in. Just at a very individual level, going back to your first point around sort of confidence and the ability to bring humility to meetings and things like that. If say someone is listening who wants to develop their own leadership skills, but struggles with things like confidence, if they might be junior or they're just a little bit introverted, and they might see something that they want to action, whether it's in a meeting, but they're perhaps a little bit scared of standing up for themselves or voicing their opinion. How can they sort of start improving upon that as a soft skill in practical ways?
Yeah, one of the ways, particularly in meetings, is to, a lot of times I think we run from meeting to meeting and we see what's up next on our calendar and we just go there, we do that. And if you can take a moment and plan your day and say, who's going to be at this meeting? Like, I like to pick, like, who's going to be on your Zoom screen, or who's going to be sitting around the table? What is going to be on their heart and mind about this topic? What are some areas and pain points for them? And how can I show up to add as much value in this meeting, to confidence, to own my strengths, that I belong in that meeting, that I have something important to say, and think about what that might be and write down a couple of those points. And so, as the conversation evolves, you've already pre-thought about your contribution. Now, I will say this. If you have a bunch of meetings on your calendar and you don't feel like you've got anything important to say in any of those meetings, you need to look and say, am I even in the right meetings? Because if you're just someone who's just showing up as a passive observer to meetings, it's probably not, you're not spending your time on the most important things. So I'd say that's one of the ways. And then in our Courageous Cultures book, one of the things, 40% of people in our Courageous Cultures research said they lack the confidence to share their ideas. So one of the ways we work with managers is, and individual contributors too, is how do you position your ideas in a way that they're more likely to be heard? And so we have this very simple, you'll see we like a lot of acronyms. We call it the idea model. So say you've got an idea that you want to pitch to your boss, but you're not sure. Think about this. Why is this idea interesting? Meaning strategically aligned with your boss's most important thing. Why would they care about this idea? How is it going to contribute to the business? D, is it doable? Can you explain why you think you can pull this thing off right now? Because people don't, especially in this moment that we're in, still in the throes of the pandemic, people don't want a lot of ideas for 2 years from now. They want ideas for the next 6 months, right? E, is it engaging? This is where you think about the stakeholders. Who else might be interested in this idea? Can you check with HR to see what they might think? Can you talk to the finance folks? Is there budget for this kind of thing? And then A, what are a couple of actions that you would recommend as first next steps? So now, if you go to your manager and you say, hey, I really care about this business. I care about this team. I want us to be successful. I've been thinking and I have an idea. Would you be open to hear it? Of course, your manager is going to say yes. Then you position it. This is why it's interesting, doable, and here's who we need to engage. Here are a couple of my next steps. Now, your manager might not implement your idea, but they are certainly going to say, wow, this is a person who's passionate about the business and is a critical thinker. You can't lose if you position an idea like that.
No, I mean, it's just awesome. I think one of the things that I do at my companies is I'm a big fan of using meeting minutes before a meeting, so that everyone should be contributing. They should have time to read through anything like stats or the latest research and things that have been shared by others in that meeting memo. And that kind of, it can sometimes help people who might have collected lots of research, but be a little bit timid to speak up in meetings, to have more access to actually be able to recount that when the meeting starts. In terms of how you kind of practically develop that with an employee in terms of kind of coaching and getting feedback on that, how far do you kind of go in terms of sort of behavior change and looking at like an individual level, or do you really sort of upskill the managers mainly and then give them the coaching tools to develop their employees?
It's interesting because I think it really is important to do both. And so one of the philosophies that we have here at Let's Grow Leaders is called Leaders as Teachers. And so what we do, and so say you're working on a 6-month program with us, you'll work with us, David and I, live online. And then in between sessions, you'll go back and do actual work with your team, applying the concepts. And we're building some new products right now, actually, where there will be some video based. So now it'll even be supported by, watch this video with your team, have this facilitated conversation with your team. So that's a new way we're doing it for next year. But I just had a beautiful conversation today. I loved it so much. So we have a new global program that we're doing with a company. And so we've been training 5 cohorts of people, and we just launched their first cohort. So they went through their first module of training with us. In between sessions, they have now organized learning groups. So the group that I worked with today was 4 different levels of the business. So very senior, more middle management, all the way to the frontline supervisor, but all in a slice of the department. And I spent an hour with them, and we said, okay, so we learned the 6 concepts you can't lead without last time. Let's talk about how 5x5 communication is going to work here for this sales team, and the conversation was so rich. Here's where we could apply it. We've got this element of our sales process that we really need to be making sure everybody is doing consistently. We're not as good at that as we think we should be. So let's do a 5x5 communication around that. And then we talked about check for understanding. Where is checking for understanding breaking down? How could we apply it here? Let's give some specific examples. Who in this department is super good at that? Oh, you know who's good at that? Joe's good at that. Joe, tell us what you do. And that whole making it real for people really can make a big difference as well.
It's really interesting hearing how you practically implement that at a business, because I think that's such a fantastic way to do it, where you're bringing in almost like champions and finding out who is the sort of perceived best leader or communicator or salesperson, and using them as kind of a figurehead for everyone else to then sort of either observe or interact with to improve their own skills in quite a safe and data driven way. I'm sure you've probably seen some of the bits that we do at Verti, where we use a lot of avatar based or video based training to actually simulate some of those role plays digitally, and whether that's in healthcare with difficult conversations or in a work environment with things like appraisals or hiring and firing and things that often people don't necessarily know the best way to approach, but through practice they can get much more confident and better at. It's a really effective way to scale things. So that's really, really interesting hearing about how you're utilizing some of those technologies. For you personally, having made this big leap, what are some of your favorite kind of stories about the training that you and your husband have delivered, and then the impacts that's had on organizations?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. What we've really been enjoying is the work that we've been doing with our new Courageous Cultures tools and techniques. So as we were noticing a consistent pattern as we were doing our training programs around the world, we would work at the very senior levels of organizations, and we would hear things like, why don't more people share ideas? Why are people so afraid to speak up? Why am I the one who has to discover this best practice? Why aren't people talking to one another about ways to improve the business? But then we would go to do training at the front line of the very same organizations, and we would hear things like, nobody really wants my ideas. Last time I spoke up, I got in trouble. Nothing ever happens anyway. Why bother? We thought, wait. Are you working for the same company? So, the senior leaders really did want ideas, and people had ideas that they were holding back. So we set out for an extensive research study with the University of North Colorado, which was both quantitative and qualitative, to answer the question, when people were holding back ideas, what kind of ideas were they holding back? And they weren't trivial. They were not sharing ideas to improve the customer experience, productivity in a process, or the employee experience. Important ideas. And when they were holding them back, why? And I mentioned 40% lacked the confidence to share their ideas. 49% said, well, I'm never asked for my ideas. 50% said nothing ever happens anyway, so why bother? And 67% said my manager operates around the notion that this is the way we've always done it, so why bother? And 56% said I'm not sharing an idea because I don't think I'll get credit, which is crazy.
Interesting.
So that's what we built. We built all this, wrote the book, and then we built all this training because that doesn't have to happen. This stuff is not that hard. So, teaching managers how to create an environment of psychological safety, to be very clear that you really do want people's ideas. Make sure people understand the strategy of where you really do need ideas so they contribute good ones. Cultivating curiosity, going out and proactively asking for ideas, and then responding with regard when people do bring you an idea, even if it can't be used. And so we created a very easy to implement way to go into organizations and do that, and then also work on real ideas with people. So some of our favorite programs have been what we call a fishbowl competition. So think Shark Tank, only friendlier. So we go to the senior team and say, okay, where do you really need great ideas? And it's been interesting. Sometimes they're operational ideas. Sometimes they're product launch ideas. Sometimes they're human ideas, like we need help with our diversity, equity, inclusion work. And so we usually get a nice mix of those strategies. And then we share them with the teams and say, pick the area you have the most passion around. And then we divide people into a couple of teams that work through using our tools to come up with a great idea. They pitch that idea to a shark, who is really just a senior executive who we've trained to respond well to these ideas. And then they select which one they think is the best of the three ideas for that strategy. And they go to the final round, and everybody in the company gets to see these ideas. And it's been fascinating why I love this training. One is it teaches people a practical tools and process they can use anytime they need an idea about something. Okay? And they are working on an idea that will strategically improve the business. And the outcomes of these, in half a day, you can end up with some really great ideas. So this is a great time of year to do this. End of year, beginning of the year, as you're building your strategic plan. We just finished one of these fishbowl competitions with a big staffing organization. And the president loved what he was hearing so much. He said, give me all the ideas that came out, not just the winners. I want to see them all. And he's taking their strategic plan and he's mapping. And he's like, is there anything we can pull in to this? And taking those ideas very seriously.
Just absolutely brilliant advice. And I think just getting back to your first comment around the survey that you conducted, I think just as a data nerd myself and on behalf of everyone listening, thank you so much for actually surveying and bringing some data into your book and everything that's kind of informing you, because I think that's so important that anything that you are then basing a lot of your training on is actually coming from real deep market research and real people within organizations. I think that's just fantastic. And secondly, I think that, we were talking just before we started recording this podcast about my background and leaving my role as a surgeon, working in some big healthcare systems in the UK and the US, and then transferring into a startup environment. And I think, certainly as a doctor, you're always problem solving, you're always thinking about things. And there's lots and lots of very creative people who, in any industry, but especially in things like healthcare, where you might see an inefficiency, you might see a better way to more quickly treat a patient, or you might be involved in research. And often there's no real route or pathway for you to share any ideas or suggestions you have. And certainly at some big organizations, those pathways might be slightly basic, like submitting a survey form, and as you say, nothing may come of that, which is a huge shame. And I think going back to your original background in sort of HR, if you're hiring people who are amazing, and that's what every company should be doing, you're going to be you want to be utilizing that talent that you've put around you. Do you sort of go into that kind of, I guess, almost like HR and talent acquisition portion when you're sort of looking at sort of culture change, or do you just sort of more focus on employee development?
Absolutely. So that a lot of the times, and we'll work with a client at a more deeper level. Sometimes people hire us just to come do training, but our favorite work is to really go in and talk about, the HR systems and processes. If you want people to speak up and be more innovative, then what kind of interview questions are you asking? Tell me about a time that you challenged a decision. Tell me about an idea that you came up with that you really thought would improve the business. Asking our people, and people say they got nothing, they've never done that, and you're really trying to build a courageous culture, they're probably not the right fit for your culture. And, and then how do you onboard? And you think about, so are you very clear from people's new hire orientation that you really want their ideas? Because if you've hired somebody from your competition, the time to get that best practice is right at the beginning before they forget about it and they start doing the thing the way you've always done them. You could go to your new hires and say, this is a challenge we've wrestled with. We're really having trouble with, keeping people productive while working from home. How did you do that over there? Was that something you did well? And they'll tell you. And, so I think that you really need to think about all the aspects. Or if you we were just talking to a CEO a few minutes ago, actually, and he said, I want to think about how do we include this in our recognition? Like, if we really are serious about, really wanting people to bring forward ideas, who are we recognizing? Who are we promoting? And can you help us think through that? And so I think all of that, it's a systematic approach. We have a chapter in the book called Building an Infrastructure for Courage, which talks about all those elements.
No, I think that, that reward function is so important. And whether it's a big corporate awards event where you've got something like either a pitch competition or you're rewarding someone for an impactful idea they've had on the business, that's just such a nice, culture positive thing to do for any organization. I mean, obviously part of the title of the book and your work is about courageous culture. When we talk about kind of courage for employees, where do you sort of position that in terms of, I suppose, people being proactive and, yes, I'm sure people who go through your training or read your book can understand sort of some of the processes there, but how are you sort of actively helping them kind of translate that into being a little bit more courageous into putting those things into practice?
Yeah.
What are some of the individual bits?
Yeah. So, interestingly, the irony about a truly courageous culture is that it takes less daily courage to show up. Because it's just the way people like us do. If you build an infrastructure where it is automatic that every employee is coming to work going, how they really care about my thoughts and how we could do this better. And so if you feel, then it doesn't feel courageous at all to say, I have an idea. But if you have so it starts really by creating the environment of psychological safety. And I would say, first thing we do is, if there's still bullying or Me Too junk or any of that happening in organizations, you are not ready to even begin building a courageous culture. You got to get rid of those toxic courage crushers first, because, if I am nervous about being harassed or discriminated or against, and then you come and ask me for my ideas, no. I'm just trying not to get fired. Right. So that's the first piece of that. And, it's interesting. We have had clients who called us and said, I saw your book, Courageous Cultures. I want you to come teach that. Then we get in and we start to do the discovery. And they say, I'm not sure we're ready. What more basic things do you have? And then we call from our first book, which was called Winning Well, A Manager's Guide to Getting Results Without Losing Your Soul. Then we bring and pull in those tools. So, for example, we had a company, they thought they wanted to do courageous cultures work. We get in and they called us back and they said, first, can you teach everybody how to ask for feedback and give feedback? Because I don't even think we can do that yet. And, so we're doing 20 sessions of asking for and giving feedback, grounding everybody in that. Then next year, we'll start to do the courageous cultures work.
A little bit of an esoteric question for you, but why do you think that a lot of organizations struggle with some of these things that we're talking about? Where do you think that the failing is? Do you think it's inherently in kind of people's backgrounds in the education system before they join corporates? Do you think it's the corporates themselves not having in-house leadership programs programmed in? What are some of your thoughts on that?
A couple of answers there. I think it's all those things. So interestingly, I got, when I first started Let's Grow Leaders, I got a call. I don't tell you which university, but it was from an MBA program. And they said, can you come and spend a couple days with our MBA orientation, teaching people, I'm talking fundamental leadership, fundamental communication skills. And I said, sure. Is this not taught in your program? And, show me where you're teaching it so I'm not redundant. No. And, and they said, and what our problem is that we are sending our people out between the first year and their second year of their MBA into internships, and they're making rookie mistakes. They don't know how to manage up. They don't know how to collaborate with their peer. They don't, right? They're competition. They're overly competitive. They're not, so we had to teach that stuff. And I said, well, why wouldn't you build that into the curriculum? Well, believe it or not, most MBA programs don't have it. It's just people think, well, I don't want to pay money for something as simple as that. So she's sneaking it into the new, the orientation. So I do think our education system is missing some of that. I do think some of the undergrad, depending on what you major in, I was a communications major, so I got a lot of communication stuff, but I don't think, maybe if you're an accounting major, you're going to get some of that. So that's the first thing. Second, I think that there are still a lot of managers who've never really had supervisor training. It is amazing to me how many calls we've gotten, particularly during the pandemic, because everything got aggravated in the pandemic. Like if you were a lousy supervisor, it was even harder in a pandemic where now people are working remotely under a lot of stress and there's a need for human connection. And if you're not good at that, so, our business has been thriving in the pandemic because the need is so great. And what has been really surprising, I always say, well, tell me what you've trained your leaders in before, because I either want to build on it or don't want to be redundant, and most of the time we hear, well, you know what? We've never really done any leadership training. So I think that, and leadership is a skill just like anything else. And I think sometimes people think, well, they'll figure it out. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is there are some lousy role models out there. I always say, be the leader you want your boss to be. So if you're watching your manager and they are doing something that is driving you crazy, don't do that. But sadly, I think, you learn and you watch and they're like, well, they led with fear and intimidation. So I'm going to lead with fear and intimidation because clearly they got promoted. So that must work. And so I think that it's all that trifecta of things that are coming together.
Yeah, again, really, really insightful. And I think just reflecting back on my career, obviously training as a doctor, you go through set communication role plays to do anything from breaking bad news with patients to explaining a diagnosis to, being humble when someone is either angry or, doesn't quite understand something that you're telling them. And actually that part of medicine combined with things like, leading a team and for me, leading an operating team, sometimes in quite high pressure or stressful environments, were probably the most translatable and transferable things over into a business setting. Purely because they gave firstly frameworks and they also gave, exactly as you said, that diversity of experience where you can see either in role plays or in real life, what works well, what works doesn't, either from watching other people or from, your own communication as that develops over time. And I think that's one really, really important thing why this isn't just sort of a one-off thing where, someone like your company and you and your husband come in and do training and then disappear. People have got to have this integrated into what they're doing. And just on that note, when you stop working with somebody, what do you see, and how do you sort of get that integrated long term with them?
Yeah, that's why we really are big believers in space learning over time and things that build. So, you'll start with our 6 concepts you can't lead without, but we call back to them on everything. So by the time they get through the program, I was just talking to one of our clients. He said, Karin, has just become cultural. And so then you don't need us. I mean, if you're dependent on us, then we're not training you well. The true sign of a leader is what the team does when the leader's not there. And I would say that's the same thing. The true sign of an effective trainer is what happens, when they're not there. And so we do a lot of things to build sustainability and repetition. That 5x5 communication that we talk about, we build that into our training as well. And I'm always surprised, how you think you've over communicated it, and yet there's still so, today, that group I was telling you about, Karin, can you just put those 6 concepts on a 1 page so I could stick it in my, office and just look at it every single day? That's how important they think these things are. But I'm thinking, gosh, you don't know them by now? We've communicated them so many times. But, when something is important, you can't over communicate it. So. Yeah.
No, that's great. And just as we start to wrap things up, I mean, one question I've been absolutely dying to ask you the whole time is, as as a person have gone through this transition from your previous role to developing your own kind of leadership, teaching and training business, writing books, from all those experiences, what are some of the perhaps the leadership or human factors skills that you have picked up or that you have identified, which perhaps are a little bit surprising or you didn't expect to encounter or develop on that journey?
Yeah, and I'm curious whether you've experienced this one too in your transition. So the first thing that surprised me about launching a startup and becoming an entrepreneur was the roller coaster of emotions. And so things will be going. There's something that will be going great, and there'll be this huge win, and then there'll be this huge disappointment, and then there's another win, and also at the early stages of the whole thing, the financial roller coaster of things, and so we'd get a big training program, I'd put all my energy into that and not do business development, and then that would end, and I'm like, oh wait, I should have been doing that all along. So I think one of the things that I've really learned, and I don't think I've handled this yet, but I'm getting better, is to just be calmer and just trust the process. That if you're focusing on doing the right behaviors consistently, yes, you're going to still have ups and downs, but you've got to know that what those behaviors are, if you do them consistently, it's going to be okay because you're doing the right behaviors. And that's, if my husband was listening, he'd be like, yeah, you still get a little emotional from time to time. but I do think I am calmer about that. And okay, that didn't go as we hoped. We didn't get that big contract we thought we were going to get. Shoot. But but we're doing the right behaviors, and the same things that attracted that, prospect is going to attract somebody else, and that will close. And so I think that's what I would say to folks, because your team doesn't want to be on an emotional roller coaster with you. It's good to be vulnerable. It's good to show up as a human being, as a leader, but you also want to buffer your team too, so that they don't have to get frantic when you get frantic, And so I think and the best way to do that is to not be frantic and to get yourself stabilized.
I couldn't agree more, and I think starting any new business is always going to be a roller coaster as you yourself are learning on that journey, and just the process of going out and speaking to customers and speaking to whether it's new hires or onboarding people, that there's always going to be ups and downs because that's sort of human nature and the nature of any type of business and the market. And I think you're absolutely right. I think controlling your emotions, especially when you're communicating with your team, it is absolutely critical. And again, going back to your that concept of kind of courage and internal confidence in some of the steps that you take to instill leadership into organizations. I think having that, especially if you're a small business owner or a founder of a scaling company, having that internally where, again, as you say, you're really trusting in the process and you're trusting in your own judgment, while also, having good people surrounding you is absolutely critical. And I've been in many situations where it's been, you've had amazing days, you've had terrible days, and it's about sort of keeping that balance and trusting in the process, as you say. I think that's fantastic advice.
Thanks.
So just as we come to the end of the podcast, one of the things we do every single time is ask people who their human performance hero is. So I'm very interested on your journey, who your human performance hero has been.
Yeah, so there are many, but I will, Seth Godin. Do you know Seth Godin? Yeah, I have been so impressed with him in a variety of ways. One, he seems to have insights that are right on. Like sometimes I read his blog every morning, pretty much before I get out of bed. I'm like, how did he know that was happening for me? So he's really speaking about important things for entrepreneurs that matter. But here's and he does it in a clever and articulate way. But I also, here's interesting. So this was many years ago, it was 2012. I decided I was going to write my first blog post. And I had read, some of his work where he's always like, ship your work. So I just wrote him and I said, I wrote my first blog post. Thanks for encouraging me to ship my work. And it was on a Sunday. Do you know he wrote back within an hour?
Wow.
And said, good for you. And he didn't say much. It was like 2 sentences. And now I look at that blog post. It was terrible. And he was probably looking at this thing going, bless her heart, But I got better. And that's his entire point. And so just start, ship it. It'll get better. And so I really also admire that he took the time to do that, and that he really does believe what he writes about.
Fantastic, just a great example, and I think just shout out for anyone that's not following Seth Godin's blog. It's really great. I'm a subscriber as well, and I think he makes some really great points, as he does in all his books. So fantastic example. Well, Karin, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. And if anyone does want to get in touch with you or get hold of a copy of your book, where can they go to find out a little bit more?
Yeah, so our website is letsgrowleaders.com, and very active on LinkedIn. If you try to find me there, it's Karin with an I, Karin Hurt.
Awesome. Well, it's been fantastic speaking with you. I could sort of talk about leadership, soft skills and everything probably all day, but we won't do that. We'll leave this snippet out there, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and wish you all the success in the future.
Oh, thank you so much. Absolutely been my pleasure.